You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 19th of July, 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, we hear from Milwaukee, where Donald Trump has been speaking at the end of the Republican National Convention. And Andrew Mueller will give us his take on the vice presidential nomination.
We learned, when we looked it up, that the 39-year-old Vance was the youngest Veep nominee since Dwight Eisenhower added to his ticket, Richard Nixon, and that worked out fine for everybody.
We'll cross to Tokyo to find out what happened at the Pacific Island Nations meeting, and we'll ask what went wrong for Britain's former governing party, the Conservatives, and who will lead them now. We'll meet the director of a new film, Putin's Playground, which explores the changing nature of Russian espionage. And finally,
I'm Sheena Rossiter, a contributing editor in Canada. Today on the Climate News Roundup, we'll look at findings from a new scientific study on how climate change is making days longer. And as we're a week out from the start of Paris 2024, we'll hear what sort of climate legacy that city hopes to leave behind with this Summer Olympics.
That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. The Israeli military continues to attack the Gaza Strip and says it's investigating an apparent drone attack that hit central Tel Aviv in the early hours of this morning, but which did not trigger the air raid sirens. Violence continues and telecommunications have been widely disrupted in Bangladesh amid student protests against quotas for government jobs, in which nearly 24 people have been killed this week. And Russia's deputy foreign minister says Moscow does not rule out new deployments of nuclear missiles in response to the planned US stationing of long-range conventional weapons in Germany. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, the Republican National Convention wrapped up in Milwaukee last night with a rousing speech from Donald Trump, now the official presidential nominee. Just after the attempted assassination on Trump at the weekend, he said he'd completely rewritten his script for the convention, which was watched by tens of millions on television. Let's get a flavour.
There was blood pouring everywhere, and yet, in a certain way, I felt very safe because I had God on my side. I felt that. Our opponents inherited a world at peace and turned it into a planet of war. We're in a planet of war. Look at that attack on Israel. Look at what's happening with Ukraine. The cities are just bombed out. How can people live like that where buildings, massive buildings, are falling to the ground? And the entire world, I tell you this, we want our hostages back, and they better be back before I assume office, or you will be paying a very big price. I will end every single international crisis that the current administration has created, including the horrible war with Russia and Ukraine, which would have never happened if I was president, and the war caused by the attack on Israel, which would have never happened if I was president.
Well, also watching that speech and staying up late in the media centre for us is HJ Mai. HJ, that speech has really only just concluded. Was it the longest presidential nomination speech in history?
I don't have the data in front of me, so I can't confirm or deny that. But yeah, it was long. It was over 90 minutes. It felt a little bit too long. But I mean, it was a crowd that loved Donald Trump. So, even you could see that some people every once in a while zoned out, looked at their phones. But, he got the applause that he needed. After what happened last weekend, I think this was a successful convention for him.
I mean, there was speculation after what happened that he would soften his rhetoric. In fact, he said that he had changed his speech. But he really didn't get much away from his divisive tone, did he?
No, not at all. Not at all. So like I said, so he spoke for over 90 minutes, and I would say maybe the first 20 to 30 minutes. So the initial third of his speech, he tried to strike a more, tone of unity, of, basically saying that, hey, we are all citizens of this country and we should all come together in this moment. And, then when he talked about, actually the assassination attempt, when he described what went through his head and how it felt for him, those were the only moments where he really, went away from his usual script. But I would say, 2/3 was just the Trump that we've heard over the last 8 years. It was a lot of those, type of populist messaging. I think at one point he said, he could, end the war in Gaza, end the war in Ukraine with a simple phone call. And, it's those type of things that we've heard so often. So, no, his tone has not really changed. He tried, but it didn't stick.
Now, that rallying cry of fight, 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 which we first heard him chant right after the shooting, that was very much the theme of the evening. And it was not by accident, because we know that warm-up speakers included the professional wrestler Hulk Hogan and also Dana White, who's from the Ultimate Fighting Championship. So this was very much a planned thing. Did you get that sense of aggression in the room?
No, there was no sense of aggression in the room. I mean, it was definitely planned, as you mentioned, with the former wrestling star and the CEO and president of the Ultimate Fighting Championship. I mean, there was clearly a theme to make Trump, seem like this fighter, the guy, who, has, some God put his hand over him, was the theme here also, to protect him, that this is, divine intervention. But within the convention center or the arena where the convention took place, no, there was no aggression. This has been really, for the past 4 nights, this has been just a celebration of Trump, of the Republican Party, and of the delegates and all the people who came here themselves. I mean, the Republican Party at the moment feels so confident that they will have a good showing in November, because not just because of, what's going on within the party, but also, the struggles that the Democrats are going through at the moment.
So let's have a look at some of the things that he said. I mean, it was very much doubling down on his America First agenda, wasn't it? What does he say he's going to do?
I mean, the things we've heard before. He will finish his border wall. He talked about, keeping migrants out of the country, helping the middle class here in the U.S., stopping factories from moving overseas, bringing jobs back, building out the military, not getting into foreign wars, all those type of things like I said, we've been hearing for years now. I mean, he's criticized the Biden administration for the high inflation that's going on, for, the stagnant wages. And he made, some, claims that are just not backed up by facts, like rising crime. I mean, violent crime at least, has been falling here in the U.S. Several years, and actually has been falling more under Biden than under under Trump's first 4 years in office. So there are also those absolutely false claims, and he went through all of that, for a good hour.
And he was quite alarming on climate change. He's going to roll back on those electric car rules. His phrase, drill, baby, drill. He's going all out for oil. He didn't, interestingly, mention abortion or January the 6th.
Yeah. That's definitely also, not an accident. January 6th, even though, he still thinks that he won the 2020 election and that he did nothing wrong. It's just not something that, as we head in now to the general election, or maybe you can say we've been in a general election cycle for a while, it's just not something, that works a lot with independent voters, with maybe now Democrats who, might consider actually, either not voting or maybe really switching parties. It's just a topic that it's just not, worth mentioning. And the abortion topic. I mean, it has been a losing topic for Republicans for the past 2 years since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. And so, those are two topics that are just not winning issues for Republicans. And therefore, there was a concerted effort to really not mention those things. Neither Trump nor I think Sarah Huckabee Sanders was the only one who mentioned abortion, if I remember correctly, over the past 4 days.
He gave a shout out to Viktor Orban of Hungary, who also said Kim in North Korea misses him.
Viktor Orban flew down to Mar-a-Lago recently. Apparently they had a good conversation, according to him. Apparently Orban, according to his telling, told him that, everybody feared Trump while he was in office. That's why there were no wars during his 4 years, because Russia feared him, China feared him, everybody feared him. And so it seems like, those two, Orban, as you guys know, another right-wing populist, and Trump get along very nicely. Yeah, and the same that he mentioned that Kim is missing him. I mean, it was very cheapish, but as you know, during his term in office, I think he met with Kim 3 times. And during those times, North Korea, they certainly did not have as many, weapons tests and missile tests as they have now. And obviously, the issue of Taiwan, of the security of Korea, those are all things that he blames the Biden administration for, and he claims that once he will be in office, and because of deterrence through strength, that those issues would be immediately resolved on day one if he enters the White House again.
And just finally, HJ, many previous speakers suggested, and indeed he did himself, that his life was spared by God's providence so that he can continue a sacred mission for the nation. It did seem to be, certainly watching it, that there's some sort of near messianic worship of the man. Was that your sense?
Yes, there certainly is here. As conservatives here in the U.S., especially Republicans, the evangelical vote, the Bible Belt here, a lot of Republicans are very, God-fearing, religious people. And so, having this theme of, that there's a higher power who, has put Donald Trump here, to fulfill whatever destiny it is that he is supposed to fulfill. It's definitely something that attracts a lot of Republican voters. And it was definitely a theme that it was not just, a stroke of luck that he tilted his head in the last second and the bullet, missed by a quarter inch. No, that there was, a higher power who protected him. And that was absolutely a theme. I think the first one who mentioned it was Marjorie Taylor Greene, the, controversial conspiracy theory-loving congresswoman from Georgia on Monday, and it has kept on, and then he himself was talking about it tonight. All of this is very calculated. He knows the base that he's talking to, but there's has been definitely this theme at this year's convention.
And we'll wait and see if there is indeed the second coming in November. HJ Mai at the Republican National Convention, thank you very much indeed. This is The Globalist. It is just coming up to 15:14 in Tokyo, 7:14 here in London. The 10th Pacific Island Leaders Meeting, or PALM, wrapped up in Tokyo on Thursday. It was attended by representatives from 18 Pacific Island Forum members and Japan. South Pacific Island nations have become a focus of security concern for Japan and its ally, the United States, and their regional partners such as Australia and New Zealand in recent years, as Beijing increases its presence in the region. This was reflected in the joint declaration at the end of the meeting, which said that the leaders agreed that Japan should provide greater support and cooperation in climate change, maritime security and defence, economic development and other areas. China was not mentioned by name. Well, Alessio Patalano is a professor at King's College London and an expert on Asian defence, and he joins me now. Alessio, this meeting was originally launched under a Japanese initiative back in 1997, and I wonder if you could explain what PALM is and how the group's evolved and the changing nature of its concerns.
Good morning, Georgina. Well, first of all, it must be said, you are absolutely right that it was initially a Japanese initiative, and that is because it's part of a long-standing engagement of Japan with the Pacific Islands. Japan has been consistently a very strong aid provider. It has focused in the last years, in part because of the longevity of this initiative. It has had a genuine advantage compared to many other international actors to bring together the leaders of the Pacific Islands and listen to their voices. And so the themes that you see in the statement are themes that genuinely are felt across the broader Pacific region as themes of great relevance. In particular, when we're talking about maritime security, there is a genuine sense these are countries that have relatively limited resources. They have to cover this absolutely vast exclusive economic zones. So there's a problem of environmental management, fishery, patrol, and also drug smuggling control. So in that sense, we're talking about something that has been on the agenda for a long time, and it's something that, in a way, sort of, if we think back at the years under the late Prime Minister Abe of the free and open Indo-Pacific, was one of the ways in which Japan could engage directly with this part of the Indo-Pacific region and listen to their voices and try in that way to identify an apt and effective fashion to engage with problems that were felt as important in the region, which in turn enabled Japan to have a significant voice by itself political capital in terms of influence, and in that sense, sort of avoiding having to talk about China, whereby many of these actors did not want to talk about it, but at the same time increased Japan's reputation for a reliable security stakeholder, and above all, a security provider.
Well, as a security provider, though, and with this agreement to bolster Japan's role in regional development to counter China's growing military and economic influence, I wonder how that will actually work in practice.
So it must be said that there are a number of initiatives. I mean, if you go, for example, to places like Fiji, whereby the country hosts a constellation of different international agencies, NGOs, regional initiatives. So Japan's work is one that is slightly more tailored, but it has a sufficient amount of Japanese Japanese government investment, so that regional actors actually recognize its value and are very keen to continue to engage. And that has given Japan a strong and very independent voice, a voice that is very different from China, because it's not just one that is aimed at individual states and coming in with economic initiatives that focus on a particular project. These are also initiatives that have, because they are regional in nature, they are about creating a certain standard of behavior, a certain awareness about the problems, a certain common way to engage with it. So I think in that sense, that's the key difference. Whereas the Chinese approach is very much about seizing opportunities on the spot. Japan's approach is a long-term investment into developing trusted forms of relationships in which local actors will understand that the Japanese requests as a manifestation of Japan's attempt at creating its own influence in the region are not just driven by self-interest, they also overcoated around a genuine commitment to improve aspects such as maritime security, which in the Pacific very much regards the points that I mentioned above, but also an engagement increasingly with issues such as climate change and sea level rises and the implication that it has for many of these realities.
And climate change, of course, was a huge theme in this meeting. They were talking about their 2050 vision for the prosperous blue Pacific. Can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So this is a really important piece of the equation. And Georgina, this is also something that helps us focusing on what's beyond the question of a Sino-American contest for supremacy in the Indo-Pacific, because across the Pacific islands, and in some respects, parts of the Indian Ocean as well. As I said earlier, these are states in which the relationship between, if you want, sovereign rights and sovereign maritime territory and land sovereign territory is completely the opposite, the other way around to most countries. They have these absolutely enormous spaces to protect. But this also means that a lot of these islands are relatively small, relatively flat, and so with sea level rises, there's a risk of a further contraction of their land sovereign spaces. So projects like the Blue Pacific 2050 really is about increasing the capacity to monitor the environment, to understand what the problems with the environment are, but also finding ways whereby countries with limited resources can actually improve. And this collectively becomes also a stronger voice to have more important conversations in other multilateral forums where climate change is a big issue.
Yes.
So 2 points. One, this is a real thing. 2, not everybody is concerned about the Chinese frigates and destroyers when it comes to regional security. They actually think about existential challenges, such as the one of sea level rises.
Alessio, thank you very much indeed. That's Alessio Patalano there. Now, still to come on the programme.
We did not learn, as in fairness we generally don't in such instances, why God didn't get involved a bit earlier in the incident or intercede on behalf of the other casualties.
We'll hear from Andrew Mueller. This is The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. I'm Georgina Godwin. It's 7:22 here in London, and I'm joined in the studio by Yossi Meckelberg, who's an Associate Fellow with the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House. Yossi, it's lovely to have you back. We're starting with a story which is actually very, very close to home for you. This is what we've been reporting in our headlines. It's this drone that hit Tel Aviv.
Good morning. Yeah, it's a bit of a shock to wake up in the morning. You're almost used to this in some parts of the country, the case, but the idea that a drone managed to penetrate the air defense system, and the IDF already said that it was a human error, which human errors can happen. So they identified the drone, but didn't intercept it, and the result of it is 1 person killed, 8 injured. And it's really, to those who know Tel Aviv, it's not far from what used to be still the embassy in Tel Aviv, close to the seafront. This is really the heart of bustling Tel Aviv, especially that it's Friday. I mean, it's open at night, but people will, going out actually until very late on Thursday night. It could have, ended even worse. But the very idea, and the thing is that this didn't come from Hezbollah, it didn't come from Hamas, it's the Houthis, which means we're talking about the axis of resistance, we talk about the axis of resistance, we talk about Iran. So the scope for escalation here is dangerous.
I know we're going to be following this story much more in the briefing that's coming up at midday London time. Let's turn now to America. Now, we've been talking about Donald Trump's speech, but of course there is also huge pressure being brought to bear on Joe Biden to step down. The latest person who it's reported has said he should is Barack Obama.
And we know that when we read in the papers, and here is come from the New York Times, it was in the Washington Post, when sources close to Obama, we know what does it mean. It means, the pressure, it's Nancy Pelosi, it's the big, gun in the Democratic Party. And this, it seems, that it's going to happen, that he will step down. And to be honest, it makes sense. You read the public opinion polls. The only thing that I'm surprised that it took so long, because if you saw public opinion polls, for instance, Pew and every other website, for very long, it's not only that the Republicans thought that Biden was too old to run. It's because those who support, the natural supporters among Democrats, thought that they feel a bit fearful to vote for someone that might, how he's going to function, how he's going to end the term. So now I think the debate caused kind of a panic within the party. And even then the attempt to recover. So we see there is another article in the New York Times talk about Nancy Pelosi, the age of 84 actually, older than Biden, talk about her, but a serial winner, and she can't stand the idea that the Democrats will lose this election, especially considering who they are running against. That the idea, I think what's really petrified them, is the idea of a second Trump. Had it been a Mitt Romney or John McCain, I'm sure they could have lived with that, not happily. And then the ripple effect, I think, for people like Pelosi, for Obama, how it's going to affect election in Congress. Are they going to lose the Senate? So I think you can see from all the pressure is mounting, him not being well, struck down with COVID. This weekend is going to be very interesting. Very
interesting indeed. A lot of papers predicting Biden might make an announcement over the weekend. Quick look now at Europe. Starmer, that's Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister here in Britain, has promised EU leaders that he'll repair ties with their countries.
I think it's, the bad news, there is a lot more to repair, considering 14 years of Tories Brexit, and especially the rhetoric of the Conservatives when it comes to Europe. And the new Prime Minister here, Keir Starmer, is not trying to take exactly the opposite. And he said something very interesting in the speech. We might have our difference, but we share values. And we should work with our values. I think the key word right now with Labour is a reset. It's resetting the UK, resetting almost everything. And probably the issues need resetting more than any is relations with Europe. Europe, for the Conservatives, it was a dividing issue, but also kind of a whipping issue. Whenever everything goes wrong, just blame Europe for it, whether it's migration or trade or security. Everything is because the Europeans are too progressive. Now you have a different prime minister, and I think the meeting yesterday, which much of it concentrated on, and rightly so, on Ukraine and the need to support for Ukraine, where actually the Conservatives very strong when it comes to supporting Ukraine. But the idea that when it comes to, for instance, dealing with the illegal immigration, improving trade, there is a need for reset, and I think Keir Starmer, just in his speech yesterday, just put it right.
Yeah. A lot about climate in the programme today, and some really quite shocking sentences handed down here in the courts in Britain, record sentences under this new public nuisance law. And these were 5 UK climate activists. Tell us a little bit more about this.
Yeah, so I found that actually, if I can quote the judge, Christopher Hare said, at least some of the concern, this is from the Financial Times, of the defendants are shared by many, cross the line from concerned campaigner to fanatic. And I think the use of the word fanatic, this is more than legal. this is actually a moral judgment, which I'm not so sure that this is what the are called. It's a legal issue. Yes, some of the people come from especially the Roger Helm from Extinction Rebellion. They take a view which only activism going to stop or to change policies right now. There is another report today that 6 million Brits would suffer from extreme condition or heat as a result of climate change, which means it can affect their life and life expectancy, health. The idea that they were sentenced, either 4 or 5 years in jail for trying to block a road with all the costs, and we know whoever drives, it's not nice to come to I'm not so sure where is the fanaticism here, because people got much less than 5 years for much worse crimes committed, and I'm sure it will go to appeal. And I, to be honest, I'll be quite astonished if it would be community. I mean, if they got 2, 3, 6 months, there won't be 5 years for trying to block a road. It brings a completely new. It opens the debate about democracy and the right to protest and the reaction by the authorities when there is a legitimate cause to protest.
Exactly, and just how seriously this government is prepared to take climate change. Yeah. Yossi, thank you very much indeed. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. The Israeli military says it's investigating an apparent drone attack that hit central Tel Aviv in the early hours of this morning, but which did not trigger the air raid sirens. Israeli military confirmed it had killed a senior commander of the Iran-backed Hezbollah militia in southern Lebanon. There are reports that on Thursday, Israeli forces bombarded refugee camps in the centre of the Gaza Strip and struck Gaza City in the north as tanks pushed deeper into Rafah in the south. Violence continues and telecommunications have been widely disrupted in Bangladesh amid student protests against quotas for government jobs, in which nearly 24 people have been killed this week. The nationwide agitation, the biggest since Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was re-elected earlier this year, has been fuelled by high youth unemployment. Nearly a fifth of the country's 170 million population is out of work or education. And Russia's deputy foreign minister says Moscow does not rule out new deployments of nuclear missiles in response to the planned US stationing of long-range conventional weapons in Germany. The missiles that Russia and the United States are contemplating deploying are intermediate-range ground-based weapons that were banned under a 1987 US-Soviet treaty. The US quit the treaty in 2019, accusing Russia of violations that Moscow denied. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. The British Conservative Party suffered spectacular losses in the UK election last month, going from 43.6% of the vote and an 80-seat majority under Boris Johnson in 2019 to just 23.7% of the vote and 290 seats behind Labour under Rishi Sunak. Well, George Parker is political editor at the Financial Times. He joins us now on the line. George, what was the reason for the Tory rout in the polls? Was it just 14 years of being useless?
I think they were an exhausted government and Britain was an exhausted country. I think the country had tired of the way that the Conservatives were doing things, the constant internal fighting, the repeated change of leadership of the Prime Minister, and basically a sense that the country wasn't working. I think that's what you picked up again and again on the doorstep. Nothing in this country seems to work, whether it's the health service or potholes in the roads, or prisons, which are so full you have to let the prisoners out. There was just a sense that the country needed a change. Yeah.
Now, before the election, there was much talk of the mafia-like 5 families. Is the Conservative Party still split into these groups?
It is, yeah. I mean, these were 5 factions, mainly on the right wing of the Tory party with slightly different approaches, but basically the same sort of theme. And look, I mean, the Conservative Party's got a really big problem here because they lost the election on 2 fronts. They were losing votes to sort of the moderate centre-left Conservative constituency, particularly people living in London and the wealthier south of England. And then they were losing seats to the Labour Party in urban working-class areas in the north. So the Conservative Party split really about how it responds to this disastrous defeat on July the 4th. Do they try and rebuild in their traditional areas in the south by appearing to be moderate and mainstream, which frankly is I think, the best route for survival for the Tory party? Or do they sort of go down a more of a Trumpian route and try to appeal to that white working class audience? And that's the big dilemma facing them now.
And of course, that will become apparent once they choose a leader. So who's that likely to be?
Well, they're in the process now of starting to begin that choice of candidates, and there are a number of people contesting it. On the right, you've got people like, for example, Priti Patel, Robert Jenrick, Suella Braverman, whose signature policies are all their enthusiasm for sending migrants to Rwanda. So you get a sense of where they come from on the right. Then you've got sort of mainstream sort of centrist people like James Cleverly, the former Foreign Secretary, who's seen as quite sort of moderate, a Brexiteer. And then on the sort of more centre-left ground of the Conservative Party, Tom Tugendhat, who comes from a dynasty of European officials, pro-European, and seen as the most moderate of the candidates there.
Could Boris Johnson be a wild card?
Well, Boris Johnson's not currently a member of Parliament, so he wouldn't be eligible to stand. But he is waiting in the wings for sure, and I'm sure would love at some future point another tilt at the leadership. I think Boris Johnson sees his political career in Churchillian terms. The idea that you can lead your country, go off and sort of travel around the world, earn a bit of money, then come back. So I think he hasn't ruled out a return at some point. The other person to mention, of course, is Nigel Farage, the populist godfather of Brexit, leader now of something called the Reform UK Party, whose party you now have 5 members of Parliament. And there is some talk about whether Nigel Farage should be admitted back to the Conservative Party, whether he should provide the new leadership the Tory party needs. I personally think that's a route for political disaster for the Tories, to go down that Farageist populist route.
And finally, George, what's the timeline for this? When will we know who the new leader of the party is, taking over from Sunak, who, of course, is the only person who has actually apologised?
Yes, the party is currently in the throes of trying to work out how and when it appoints the new leader. We're expecting to get a timetable and a structure for the leadership contest at the start of next week. The widespread expectation in the Tory party is that they'll probably try and do it in October, around the time of the Conservative Party conference. There are lots of people, I say, in the Tory party who would much rather have a longer contest, just to give the party a chance to lie down in a dark room with a towel over its head and try to work out what they do next.
George, thank you very much indeed. That's George Parker there. And you're with Monocle Radio. Now it's Friday, so here's Monocle's contributing editor Andrew Mueller with what we learned this week.
We learned this week that inciting and or gloating about political violence is all fun and games.
And we'll stand up to crazy Nancy Pelosi, who ruined San Francisco. How's her husband doing, by the way? Anybody know? And she's against building a wall at our border, even though she has a wall around her house, which obviously didn't do a very good job. If she gets to pick her judges, nothing you can do, folks. Although the Second Amendment people, maybe there is, I don't know. So if you see somebody getting ready to throw a tomato, knock the crap out of them, would you? Seriously. Okay? Just knock the hell. I promise you, I will pay for the legal fees. I promise. I promise.
Until one's own champion is on the receiving end, in which case it's dreadful, disgusting, and all the fault of your political rivals.
Georgia Republican Congressman Mike Collins posted, quote, Joe Biden sent the orders. And Trump campaign surrogate Nick Adams posted on social media, quote, Joe Biden's rhetoric is directly responsible. There can be no discussion. This is a fact. And then right-wing journalist Sean Davis wrote that, quote, deranged Democrats knew Biden couldn't win, so they incited one of their toadies to try and take out his opponent.
We learned basically that there is absolutely nothing to which a certain cohort of American conservative cannot respond in partisan bad faith. A cohort very much including the newly anointed Republican nominee for the vice presidency.
Hooray.
This guy. We learned, yes, that Donald Trump had lit upon Ohio Senator and author of dull book Hillbilly Elegy J.D. Vance as his running mate, creating the proximate possibility of the first millennial US president, thereby skipping Generation X, a development which will now be assessed by Monocle's Generation X desk chief, Tom Edwards.
Whatever, man. Just skip us out. We'll do something else. Better things to do anyway with my time.
We learned, when we looked it up in a big book, that the 39-year-old Vance was the youngest Veep nominee since Dwight Eisenhower added to his ticket a poor-born chippy military veteran turned dogmatic culture warrior. Richard Nixon, that was, and that worked out fine for everybody. From which decision we learned that maybe Donald Trump's narrow escape had revealed a hitherto dormant forgiving side to his character, as we learned that Senator Vance's views on the former president have evolved somewhat from this.
I'm going to vote third party because I can't stomach Trump. I think that he's noxious and is leading the white working class to a very dark place.
To this.
If you go back to what I thought in 2016, another thing that was going on, Sean, is I bought into the media's lies and distortions. I bought into this idea that somehow he was going to be so different, a terrible threat to democracy.
Anyway. We also learned quite a lot from the Republican Party more broadly about the priorities of the Lord God Almighty, who, while clearly having zoned out of several current wars, incalculable general cruelty and injustice, and in the specifically US context north of 40,000 American deaths by firearms every year, had apparently roused himself to intervene in one very specific instance.
You don't get slight grazes to the ear. I mean, that is divine intervention, that he was not, mortally wounded.
Fate stepped in, God, the hand of God, call it whatever you like.
Evil came for the man we admire and love. I thank God that his hand was on President Trump.
The fact that this is about milliseconds and millimeters that changes this from being an attempt and an assassination should really talk about the divine intervention that has occurred here.
Trump is truly blessed by the hand of God.
We did not learn, as in fairness we generally don't in such instances, why God didn't get involved a bit earlier in the incident or intercede on behalf of the other casualties. Strange and mysterious ways and so forth, though perhaps just due reward to the beneficiary of divine intervention for his many diligent years of assiduous study of the Gospels.
I'm wondering what one or two of your most favored Bible verses are and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it because to me that's very personal. When I talk about the Bible, it's very personal, so I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into...
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite?
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
Even to cite a verse that you like?
No, I don't want to do that.
You're an Old Testament guy or a New Testament guy?
Probably equal.
Mostly, though, we learned, as usual, that nobody ever really learns anything, and especially not anything about their own history. We learned that US President Joe Biden appeared completely bewildered, which we grant is not news in itself, but specifically completely bewildered by the thing that had happened.
The idea that there's political violence or violence in America like this is just unheard of.
Unheard of? Political violence in America?
Huh?
Well, quite. An especially extraordinary statement from someone who would well recall Kennedy's funeral and possibly McKinley's, Garfield's and Lincoln's. And Julius Caesar's. But we did learn that one elected representative does have a remedy for what ails modern democracies.
'Cause it's witchcraft.
We learned that Diana Șoșoacă, recently elected member of European Parliament, leader of Romania's hyper-conservative SOS party, massive weirdo, who reported for work bearing myrrh and an icon of Saint Paraskeva, possibly, who knows, patron saint of massive weirdos, proposed also engaging a priest to cleanse the Parliament of devils. At the close of this banner week for Romanian and American political discourse, we return to Laura Kramer, also Monocle's Romanian American Affairs desk chief, and indeed also Romanian American.
On behalf of both my peoples, I apologize.
Least you can do, Laura.
I know.
For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.
Many thanks to Andrew. This is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's time to talk climate with Sheena Rossiter, Monocle's contributing editor, who joins us now from Edmonton. Sheena, the summer here in Britain so far has been an absolute washout, although of course we know that the climate's heating up. How's it been for you there in Edmonton?
Over the past week and a half or so, it's been an absolute scorcher with temperatures topping well over 30 degrees. Needless to say, I've been hitting the pool on a daily basis, really soaking up the rays, but also just keeping cool in all those outdoor pools in my city.
So let's have a look at this in depth, because, of course, we're seeing reports that climate change is literally making for longer days. Can you explain what those findings are?
Yeah, so it's actually two new scientific studies, and they suggest that global warming is changing the rotation of the Earth and it's increasing the length of the days. This comes from researchers at ETH Zurich, which is a university in Switzerland, and they've been able to show how climate change is altering this axis. So global warming is just slowly changing this, and it's at an unprecedented rate, but it is very nominal. It's a very small amount, but still it's enough to mess up things like the GPS in your car and different things. But this has been around for a little bit. And in fact, in a 2021 study, it was found that melting glaciers around the world as a result of rising atmospheric temperatures, that was already causing increasing different water causes in locations in the North and South Pole to move eastward and westward, which was also causing our days to be a little bit longer.
Well, let's stay with water, because over in Canada, where you are, the city of Toronto and the surrounding areas are cleaning up after recent flooding. What's the latest?
Yeah, so earlier this week, basically months worth of rain fell in just a few hours, and major motorways across the city had just been totally awash with stormwater. Nearly 5,000 customers in the greater GTA area are still without power, and that's a better number than the day before on Tuesday, when there was 167,000 people without power. You know, this was the worst rainfall that they had seen in Toronto since 1941, and they're estimating that so far there's been about $1 billion of damage, $1 billion Canadian dollars, I should say, in that southern Ontario area. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau visited the area, and he said that this is just another highlighting that the climate change is doing pretty severe conditions to our environment, that we need to do our best in order to combat it.
Mm-hmm. And finally, the Olympics are set to kick off in Paris this week. And again, we're seeing climate change affecting this. They'll be the hottest Olympics on record. So what will the legacy be for these games in terms of climate solutions?
Well, that's a really good question, and that is what a lot of people are actually looking at. So when the Olympics took place in Tokyo in 2021, what were supposed to be the 2020 Olympics, those were already the hottest games on record, and Paris is just going to be even hotter. Europe is the fastest warming continent on the planet right now, and how Paris has been kind of selling this is they've been marketing this as a quote-unquote climate-friendly games to date, the most ever. So Paris 2024 organizers are aiming to have carbon emissions that were produced from the 2012 games in London and 2016 in Rio de Janeiro. And this is going to be a first Olympics that is in line with the 2015 Paris Climate Accord, and they're set to run 100% renewable energy with 95% of the venues that are built in pre-existing or temporary spaces. But some of the promises that have been set out by the organizing committee, Paris 2024, have received pushback. One of them is the water-based geothermal cooling system that's been set up in the Athletes' Village. That's scheduled to kind of create temperatures 6 degrees cooler than outside. But of course, if it's already that hot outside, how much of a difference is 6 degrees really going to make? So with high stakes performances and athletes trying to give their all to get that gold, they really need some cooler sleeping conditions, so to speak. So most recently, a lot of athletes have been involved in pushing them to get more temporary air conditioner units that the teams will have to pay for. So an additional 2,500 units will be installed before the games starting next week. But even though France has banned, Paris is doing a good job of trying to say that this is a low carbon emissions game, and France has banned any kind of fossil fuel advertising since 2022 in that country. That doesn't really mean that a lot of national Olympic committees are being more climate friendly. So a lot of national teams do take sponsorship from a lot of fossil fuel companies still. So you still have to look at that when you're taking that into consideration of the games, that there still is a lot of oil money behind some of these sponsorship for national teams who are going to the games for the athletes.
Sheena, thank you very much indeed. That's Sheena Rossiter in Edmonton. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
The Menu, bringing you Monocle's recipe for the best in drinking and dining. We make entertaining a doddle.
It's incredibly easy to make.
With expert opinions.
You can use fish fillets, which you grill in the oven or pan fry.
A bit of seasoning.
Lots of lime, a lot of cracked pepper, and a bit of good olive oil.
And plenty of spice.
And then you cook it in caraway and 7 spice.
As well as something sweet.
Then you take a big pot of mascarpone and spoon it into your egg yolk.
And maybe even a little bit nuts.
You take it out, you top it with some pine nuts, and you're good to go.
It's a recipe that's guaranteed to impress.
It's slightly controversial, but it's the one thing that has surprised the most people when they eat it.
Premiering live every Friday at 2000 London time, midday in Los Angeles, or downloadable wherever you get your podcasts.
Shot against Central Europe from Bulgaria to Latvia, Polish director Konrad Szałowski's new film, Putin's Playground, explores the changing nature of Russian espionage. Faced with a growing tally of incidents, Szałowski's film uncovers Russia's hybrid war in Europe and asks, what threat does their campaign pose to our world today? Well, speaking to Monocle's Julia Lassica, director Szałowski reveals how Russia has developed an eclectic strategy in a bid to influence public opinion, from targeting ministers to sabotaging defence supply chains.
Why did you decide to make this film, Putin's Playground? What was it that prompted you to embark on this?
I have specialized in social political documentaries beforehand, and I finished my previous film, 2 films about Poland under, say, right-wing populist power in the hands of the Peace Party, and it was 2018, and I started asking questions as to what were the reasons we went this way. Today in Europe, you can see Marine Le Pen and other guys who are winning, but at that point, we were kind of newcomers into the populist world. And somebody explained to me that there was an eavesdropping scandal that helped the right-wing party to compromise the Liberal Party, which was in power, led by Donald Tusk. And this eavesdropping scandal was somehow connected with Russian agents. There were traces that were not taken into account by the official investigation that was conducted by the Peace Party. So I examined it. I got in touch with investigative journalists. And this project was about investigating this particular case. But when I was thinking about it, it turned out that there were other cases similar, and not only in Poland, but at the same time in the Czech Republic. Philip Remunda, my Czech friend, said that there were ammunition depots which were blown up at the same time when we had this scandal in Poland. The scandal compromised Mr. Sikorski, the foreign affairs minister, a special envoy from the EU to Kiev. In the Czech Republic, some agents, nobody knew at the time who they were, blew up ammunition depots, and the ammunition was meant to go to Ukraine. So there was a common denominator. And later it turned out that there were more cases of this kind in Bulgaria. So from 1 to 2 to 3, I draw a line, putting together all the points, and it showed me a pattern of a system. That at the same time, in all the countries surrounding Russia, there were cases of Russian influence.
There's a really striking scene where you play with Putin's words yourself and make him say things that, he isn't saying, but you're sort of manipulating the reality of the video that you're working with. Could you tell me about that medium of the camera and of documentary in your quest to counter disinformation or show disinformation at work?
Making the film, I realized that I actually followed the explanation from Stratcom. So Elina explained to me that today the bigger danger is not say, tanks and rockets. They are also horrible, but NATO is ready and prepared and probably even stronger, at least in terms of technology, more advanced than Russia. But Russia uses our democratic freedom to put kind of seeds into societies. So those seeds actually are to inspire protests, riots, some kind of anti-system behavior of the crowds and of the societies, especially during elections. And this is even more dangerous, and this is kind of new because of technology, Facebook, AI, all the new ways of communicating. And this is the real danger that we are facing. And therefore, having seen all this, I decided to show how easy it is to manipulate. I wrote the speech that Mr. Putin delivers, making it a bit kind of funny. So this deep fake is not meant to cheat because nobody would believe it's for real. But I wanted to make people aware that what they see, especially on the internet, may not be based on facts, that Russians actually can take advantage of this worldwide freedom. And from Moscow, from Leningrad, from those factories of trolls or whatever you call them, they can somehow spread fake news, which create our awareness that we are not aware of what is real and what is not real. And it is not necessarily aiming at supporting Russia directly, because this is a kind of no-go, as one of my characters says, because everybody knows that Putin is bad and so on. But they are trying to show that Mr. Biden is very old, that Macron has an old wife who manipulates him, and so on and so on. The leaders of the West are not credible. We shouldn't trust them. Politics is bad, and we are all somehow cheated by the media. So this is the message which is transmitted through many ways, through the internet, through Facebook, through YouTube, and so on. And the deep fakes that they produce, which are sometimes very funny and kind of entertaining, they have this poison inside. And this is the real danger that I wanted to point at.
And that was Konrad Szawijski speaking to Monocle's Julia Lassica there. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Paige Reynolds, Tom Webb and Monica Lillis, our researcher Sana Jumani and our studio manager Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way. The briefing is live at midday in London. And let's have a quick look ahead to what's happening over the weekend. I will be with you on both Saturday and Sunday. On Saturday, Latika Burke will be joining me in the studio for Monocle Monocle on Saturday. And we're also joined by the co-founder of Scorpios Mykonos. His name is Thomas Hain. He's talking about a cultural arts programme, Encounters it's called, featuring artworks and video installations and live performances in Mykonos, or on Mykonos. And then on Monocle on Sunday, well, Tyler Brûlé will be your host from Zurich there. So do keep listening to us, and The Globalist will return at the same time on Monday. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening.